Immediately after that meeting, a ballot will be held between 6 and 8 o'clock, and we will count as soon as we can and provide a result as soon as we can after that.
The Prime Minister needs a majority of 158 votes in her favour to win the ballot. If that happens, she cannot be challenged for at least another year.
And in 15 minutes, I'll be talking to various leading Tories about why this leadership challenge has happened and what's the likely result. International Trade Secretary Liam Fox. And of course, we'll take you live to a very special Prime Minister's Questions at noon.
Hello, welcome to a BBC News special from Westminster with the dramatic news this morning that the Prime Minister Theresa May is facing a challenge to her leadership of the Conservative Party. That is because at least 48 backbench Conservative have written to the chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, to say they have no confidence in her leadership of the party. Just before 9 o'clock this morning, in a statement outside Number 10, the Prime Minister vowed to contest the vote with everything she's got. So, what can we expect later? Well, Mrs May is going to be addressing the 1922 committee at 5 o'clock in what will be her last chance to convince any undecided Conservative MPs to back her as leader. Shortly after she finishes speaking, the ballot will be held, and that's going to be between 6 and 8 p.m. The result will be announced as soon as possible afterwards, Graham Brady says, by 9 o'clock. Mrs May must win the support of at least half of the Conservative Parliamentary Party to avoid a leadership contest. If she loses tonight, she will not be able to stand in that contest. If she wins, she is safe from a further challenge for a year. Senior members of the Cabinet have been quick to throw their support behind the Prime Minister, and some of these have been named previously as potential leadership candidates, but the ones coming forward this morning, the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt saying she is the best person to make sure we actually leave the EU on the 29th of March. The International Trade Secretary Liam Fox has said it was the wrong time for a leadership contest, saying the country expects stability and not damaging division. The prominent Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was one of the first to submit a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister, said the country needs a new leader and it is time for Mrs May to resign. The former Prime Minister David Cameron has urged Conservative MPs to back Mrs May in the vote. Well, let's hear some of what Mrs May has had to say. The warning, this does contain flashing images.
We must and we shall deliver on the referendum vote and seize the opportunities that lie ahead. But the Conservatives must not be a single-issue party. We are a party of the whole nation. Moderate, pragmatic, mainstream. Committed to reuniting our country and building a country that works for everyone. The agenda I set out in my first speech outside this front door. Delivering the Brexit people voted for. Building a country that works for everyone. I have devoted myself unsparingly to these tasks ever since I became Prime Minister, and I stand ready to finish the job.
Prime Minister absolutely defiant earlier when she came out and spoke. We also heard from Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Conservative Backbenchers. We'll hear from him in a moment, but this is the scene live in Downing Street. The next step for the Prime Minister, she's leaving Downing Street to come to the building behind me, just a very short way away, literally just over the road, and she is going to be in the Commons for Prime Minister's Questions at midday. Well, Sir Graham Brady was speaking about the meeting that he had with the Prime Minister last night, and he said she was absolutely defiant, that she wanted to crack on and get the process underway, which is why we saw it all happen so early this morning.
I think you can draw from the fact that she was keen to move ahead swiftly, to resolve matters. I think she was keen to get on with her job and get on with the business of government. And clearly having massive speculation about whether or not there would be a confidence vote was unhelpful. And also having a protracted period between the announcement that a vote would take place and that vote taking place would have been a very difficult time and not conducive to getting on with the job. So I think it's entirely in keeping, I have to say, that she was keen to proceed swiftly and get matters resolved.
Plenty of reaction, of course, this morning as MPs decide how they're going to be voting in tonight's confidence vote. Here's what the Conservative Party chairman Brandon Lewis had to say.
Oh, the Prime Minister is the right person to take us forward. We need to give her our full support. I hope colleagues will, and then we can get back to delivering for the country and she can get out to Europe and bang the table for the UK.
And you'll be voting for her tonight?
Absolutely.
And would you urge colleagues to do the same?
I would urge all colleagues to get behind the Prime Minister, give her their full support. It's the right thing for the country, and it allows her and us as a country to focus on what we should be focused on, the domestic matters that people care about, and getting the deal in Europe when she goes out to the EU tomorrow.
Well, let's go to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, in Downing Street. Norman, the Prime Minister's supporters circling the wagons. What are her chances of survival later?
Well, not surprisingly, Mrs May's team seem to have launched a major effort to shore up support for the Prime Minister. So we've seen, I think, pretty much every single member of the Cabinet tweeting out their support and backing for the Prime Minister. We've had warnings of the risks that if Mrs May is toppled, then Brexit itself could be put at risk. Mrs May, in her statement, dramatically raising the stakes and suggesting the future of the country could be at risk if she's toppled because of the uncertainty that would follow. We've Cabinet ministers saying one vote is all she needs to win. She just needs a majority of one, and that is enough for her to continue. And then, of course, she's got Prime Minister's questions now. Perhaps more importantly, just before Tory MPs get to vote at 6 o'clock this evening, they will hear from the Prime Minister, who will address the 1922 committee. What a meeting that is going to be, because Mrs May will in effect be pitching for her political life, and moments after she's finished, Tory MPs will cast their votes. Now, I think that does actually give her quite a significant advantage, because the last thing that Tory MPs will have ringing in their ears is her appeal for support. When you talk to those around Mrs May, again, maybe not surprising, but they are predicting she will win. We heard from the Health Secretary, Matthew Hancock, earlier, predicting there would be, quotes, a strong majority for Mrs May. But bear in mind, this is a private ballot. MPs may well say something in public and then cast their votes quite differently when it comes to the crunch. And they will have to be calculating, can Mrs May actually deliver a better Brexit deal? Because looming down the tracks, everyone knows, is the meaningful vote on Mrs May's deal. And unless she can get a significantly reworked package to the backstop, then the danger is the deal goes down and you're back in the question mark about whether Mrs May can continue. So, huge, dramatic moment this evening, and the stakes are absolutely enormous.
Yes, thank you very much, Norman. Let's get the thoughts of the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable. This is obviously a matter for another party, an internal party matter on the surface, but fundamental as to where this country is going to go in terms of Brexit. Do you want her to win?
No, it's not for me to decide. I don't have a vote in this context, but it is quite extraordinary. I mean, the Conservative Party is really putting its own internal conflicts ahead of the interests of the country in a very, very damaging way. I mean, we had 5 years of coalition government. I was in the same government as Theresa May. It was stable, strong at a time of national crisis, and the contrast between the way that the current Conservative government is behaving is quite extraordinary. I mean, I suspect at the end she's going to win. I don't know, but I suspect she is. And if she does, we're back to where we were yesterday, with a unpalatable, unacceptable Brexit deal. And where do we go from there?
And how do you break the deadlock if that's the position we find ourselves in after this result?
Well, the options are narrowing. I mean, given the shambolic behaviour in the government, I think the Leader of the Opposition does have a duty to come forward with a no confidence motion. But the key is the various options that are now opening, of which I think there is growing momentum beyond the idea of going back to the country to resolve this issue.
Vince Cable, we are out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. Well, there's been a lot of reaction from MPs on Twitter this morning. The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, tweeted support for the Prime Minister with the last thing our country needs right now is a Conservative Party leadership election. It will be seen as self-indulgent and wrong. The PM has my full support and is the best person to ensure we leave the EU on the 29th of March. The former Prime Minister David Cameron urged Tory MPs to back Mrs May in the vote of confidence, tweeting, "I hope Conservative MPs will back the PM in the vote today. We need no distractions from seeking the best outcome with our neighbours, friends and partners in the EU." Meanwhile, the Labour MP Chuka Umunna has said the Tory party can change the Prime Minister, but the parliamentary arithmetic does not change. And whilst we obsess over how many Tory MPs Theresa May can get to back her, the real business of sorting out this mess we're in goes ignored once again. The Conservative MP Bernard Jenkins tweeted, "The UK changed Prime Minister in May 1940 in the middle of a monstrously greater national crisis than this. If it has to be done, it has to be done." Conservative Brexiteer Andrea Jenkins tweeted, "I take it that those cabinet ministers defending the Prime Minister this morning will not put their name in to succeed her if there is a leadership election. I hope colleagues will vote the right way this evening. It is time that we had a new leader to save Brexit and unite our country." And the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage has tweeted, "The Tory MPs have one last chance to save Brexit tonight by removing Mrs May. Time to stand up and show some courage." Well, let's talk with the Home Office Minister, Sarah Newton MP, supporting Theresa May.
Yes, I'm very much supporting Theresa May.
And so if she were to win by one vote, would that be enough?
Absolutely one's enough, but she deserves so much more. This is a completely unnecessary distraction. Parliament has got a really important job to do. Most of us were elected on a manifesto to deliver Brexit, and we need to get on and do that.
Something needs to give here, though, doesn't it? Because even if she wins, the situation does not change. A government without a majority, reliant on the support of the DUP, does not like the agreement that Theresa May has put forward. That agreement does not have the support of MPs. The EU says that is the only deal. So how does anything change? How does that deadlock get broken?
What all of my colleagues in Parliament need to remember is Parliament must deliver Brexit. There is no majority for us crashing out of the EU without a deal. There is no majority to stop Brexit. The Prime Minister is right now, well, she's had to come back clearly today, but she'll be back in Europe tomorrow, getting those assurances that colleagues are seeking on the backstop, and then we must come together and we must deliver Brexit.
There's a way out of the backstop, and that is to remain in the customs union and to have close trade ties. That would mean that there needn't be a hard border with Northern Ireland. If she won, what about a sort of grand coalition with the parliamentary majority, the Labour Party joining in to support that?
It's absolutely right that we should all be looking for what's best in our national interest. And we've spent 2 years, or the government has spent years, getting this extremely good deal, a very close relationship with the European Union, but does deliver on Brexit.
Is that something you could see the Prime Minister doing?
What the Prime Minister can do, I am sure, is come back to Parliament and actually reassure enough colleagues. We're never going to get everybody in the House of Commons agreeing, but enough colleagues to absolutely make sure that we have a good deal
very
Brexit.
Briefly, if she loses, are we closer to crashing out without a deal?
She's certainly not going to lose.
If she loses?
I just don't go there on hypotheticals.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah Newton.
Thank you.
Well, for the very latest from Downing Street and around the UK, we're going to be covering Prime Minister's questions shortly, starting at midday. That's going to be the first of her challenges today, having known the news that she's facing a leadership later in the day. We will have full coverage, of course, of events and reaction throughout the day here at Westminster. Right now we're going to join our colleagues at Politics Live with Andrew Neil, live from Westminster.
It's Wednesday, it's 11:15. We're live in Westminster on the day Theresa May faces a vote of no confidence in her leadership from her own side.
I will contest that vote with everything I've got. A change of leadership in the Conservative Party now will put our country's future at risk and create uncertainty when we can least afford it.
Enough Tory MPs want the Prime Minister gone to have triggered that vote. Only Tory backbenchers will get to vote. Do they have or do they not have confidence in Mrs May? Polling starts at 6 p.m. tonight. The results should be declared by around 8 p.m. The campaigning is already in full swing.
It just led to exasperation at the end, but she was determined to follow the wrong course.
Now we've got the prospect of 12 hours of middle-aged men coming on shows like this, slagging off the Prime Minister.
And before that vote, the Prime Minister will of course face Jeremy Corbyn at Prime Minister's Questions. We'll bring you that live in an hour's time. The consensus here in Westminster as of 11:15 this morning is that Mrs May will win tonight's vote. But the consensus is not always right these days, and when you're dealing with the self-styled most duplicitous electorate in the world, then all bets are off. And joining me on this historic day, International Trade Secretary Liam Fox, Conservative peer and Times columnist Danny Finkelstein, Daily Mirror political editor Pippa Creer, and the Conservative MP Nadine Dorries. Welcome to you all. This is what Theresa May told reporters in Downing Street just after 8:30 this morning. A warning: there is flash photography.
I will contest that vote with everything I've got. I spent yesterday meeting Chancellor Merkel, Prime Minister Rutte, President Tusk and President Juncker to address the concerns that MPs have with the backstop, and we are making progress. I was due to travel to Dublin this afternoon to continue that work, but will now remain here in London to make the case for my leadership with my parliamentary colleagues. A change of leadership in the Conservative Party now will put our country's future at risk and create uncertainty when we can least afford it. A new leader wouldn't be in place by the 21st of January legal deadline, so a leadership election risks handing control of the Brexit negotiations to opposition MPs in Parliament. The new leader wouldn't have time to renegotiate a withdrawal agreement and get the legislation through Parliament by the 29th of March, so one of their first acts would have to be extending or rescinding Article 50, delaying or even stopping Brexit when people want us to get on with it. And a leadership election would not change the fundamentals of the negotiation or the parliamentary arithmetic.
Well, the Prime Minister there giving Tory MPs reasons why they should have confidence in her and vote to keep her leader of the party and therefore Prime Minister. When I said earlier Tory backbenchers get to vote, of course it's all Tory MPs get to vote, including everybody on the government payroll. Nadine Dorries, is the Prime Minister going to win or lose this vote tonight?
Well, I think I'll put my neck out a little bit here, actually, because I know cabinet ministers who've been telephoned by the Chief Whip and told the Chief Whip that the Prime Minister has their support, and privately she does not. I know ministers who've been phoned by whips this morning who've said they will support the Prime Minister, but they're not going to. And I know MPs who've done the same. So I think almost...
This is why it is the most duplicitous electorate in the world.
Exactly. So everyone's protecting their back and protecting their jobs. So what I would say is that if she survives, I think she will only just survive. And I think that will be worse because I will think she'll be even more mortally wounded than she is now.
So when our own...
Can I just say as well, Andrew, that statement on the steps was patently untrue.
The bit about extending Article 50.
That was a fairy story.
We'll come back to
one of the problems with the Prime Minister.
Let me come back to that. It's a fair point. I've heard that from government ministers all morning, that that's what would happen. I know why they're saying it. We'll come back to it. But I just wanted to check. So when our own research people calculate that around 124 Tory MPs, including ministers, have come out for Mrs May now, that figure is not one to rely on in terms of truth.
So if MPs are coming out and campaigning for Theresa May and saying to keep the Prime Minister, I would say that's probably a more trustworthy figure. But even those, because there is one fundamental fact about this election, and that is when the Prime Minister, when they go into that voting booth tonight and they vote, they are actually voting not to keep the Prime Minister, but to keep the Prime Minister in place for a guaranteed 12 months. And there are a lot of MPs who have majorities of less than 5,000 who know that that means there is a very strong possibility that the Prime Minister will be leading them into a general election. And what every MP will do first is want to secure their majority, and they know they cannot do that with Theresa May.
All right. We'll come back again to some of that. Pippa, what are you hearing? Does the Prime Minister win or lose this vote of confidence?
Well, however it ends up, she is certainly going to fight for it, and it was quite astonishing how quickly the Cabinet came out on Twitter and elsewhere this morning and said they were going to be behind her. However, the point which Nadine, of course, has made is that can you take people at their words? And even though the BBC's very astute researchers have come up with 124 names of MPs who said that they're going to back her.
Publicly declared.
They said they publicly declared. We'll never have an opportunity to actually see whether they're telling the truth. And even...
Because it's a secret ballot.
Because it's a secret ballot. But even if she reaches the 158...
She needs 158 to win.
In order to win, she's made it clear that if she wins by one vote, hangs on by one vote, and her cabinet colleagues were saying this to me privately this morning, she will stick with it because she's determined to see her Brexit deal through. However, I think there is definitely a boundary, a point at which it becomes too difficult for her to continue, even if she does win the vote. I mean, if she has 100 MPs voting against her, for example, is it really tenable for her to carry on
with
as
that
Prime Minister
amount of resistance?
With that degree of resistance. So there might come a moment where the men in grey suits come along and say, actually, PM, it's time for you to go anyway.
Danny Finkelstein, does she win or lose tonight's vote?
I think she will win. I think she'll win by a reasonable margin. There will be quite a large number of people against her, but not enough for her to decide to...
What would you describe as reasonable?
Well, I think it is at least possible that 100 members of Parliament will vote against her. But I think that is a considerable number, but she will still stick it out, in my opinion, if that happens. One rare moment of consensus, it will be wonderful tomorrow that we'll have 9 months before someone can speculate about 48 letters again, which has been...
Assuming she wins.
Yes. And
wins with a decent majority.
No, even if she doesn't win, with the 48 letters at least we won't.
Well, we'll then be on to who's going to run in the leadership race if that happens, if she loses. Liam Fox, does the Prime Minister win or lose tonight?
She wins.
How well does she win?
I think she needs to win by one. I think it's a bit ironic that people say said in the referendum on Europe, a win was a win, but when it comes to the Prime Minister, she's got to win by a certain amount or they don't regard it as being valid.
But if she wins by one, I know what the rules say. The rules say you need a majority. Out of the 315, as Pippa was saying, by our simple arithmetic, that's 158. That's winning by one. That's the arithmetic. But this is politics. If she wins by one, I suggest to you, she cannot survive.
Well, one wouldn't be a great victory, but it's a victory.
Really?
The Prime Minister, the rules are clear that give us a chance to challenge a sitting leader. And I voted for Ian Duncan-Smith when the same thing happened to him, and I'm voting for Theresa May as it happens to her. I think she will win, and I think that the Tory party needs to understand what we're being asked to do. We have two tasks, in my view. Deliver Brexit, stay in office. Does changing leader now make those tasks easier or harder for us? It makes them harder.
And we disagree on that point.
Nadine?
I think one of the things we've realised about Theresa May during these 2 years of negotiations is that she does not command the respect or the authority of the 27 other European leaders. The sight of her travelling around Europe with her begging bowl over the last 24 hours has been a humiliation on the world stage for her. And I think a new leader, somebody who has an entirely different approach, who is able to talk and negotiate without a briefing paper beforehand, who can freelance negotiate, who is a stronger, more determined person to deliver what the country voted for, will get a different policy. And it's all about changing the policy and getting a better deal. You know, I just don't think Theresa May has the ability to do that anymore, and we have to do that, because if we don't, we will lose the DUP, and if we use the DUP, we lose power.
I mean, Nadine's contention is that Boris Johnson would be a stronger, more respected person by the European 27 than Theresa May, and, you know, with the greatest respect, I think that's... But I think you do believe that.
Well, I believe any number. I believe there are a number who could.
Okay, but you do believe... No, but okay, but you do believe...
I'd also like to see Amber Rudd on the ballot paper going out to people.
No, I know, but that's not the point. You do believe that he would be, and I think that is an eccentric rhetoric contention. I just don't agree with the idea that if the Prime Minister was respected more than she is, and there's absolutely no evidence that she's not personally respected, it would make any difference whatsoever to our fundamental negotiating position. And from the beginning, I think that has been a misconception. Now, obviously, I realise that is just a fundamental political disagreement, but the Conservative Party is now going to test that, and I think that Theresa May is going to win that, with all the consequences that you, for example, say follow when you win an election, which is the result sticks.
OK. Now, she had to withdraw the vote on her deal because she finally recognised it was going to go down to defeat, probably big defeat. What has she achieved by her tour around Europe yesterday?
Well, the Prime Minister was supposed to be continuing with that today. We've now had an interruption.
Yeah, but what did she achieve? Yes, she saw Mrs. Merkel yesterday. She saw the Dutch Prime Minister yesterday. She was in Brussels too. What has she achieved?
Well, I guess we'll find out in time, but that it's a negotiation that's ongoing.
Liam, she achieved nothing.
You don't know what the Prime Minister discussed yesterday. You don't know what the options were being looked at.
But more worrying is you don't know.
Well, the Prime Minister was very clear that the House of Commons would not pass the backstop and the Irish protocol as long as there was the fear that we could be locked into that. And she said she understood exactly what the House of Commons meant by that, and she was going to take that message to European leaders. I think at the very least the Prime Minister should be allowed to complete that part of her negotiation.
So what has she achieved so far, Liam Fox? She went to see Mrs. Merkel, who, despite fading in power and importance in Europe, is still the most important leader Europe has. After Mrs. Merkel saw our Prime Minister, she went to her CDU party gathering, basically to say, we're not giving in on this. They're getting nothing more. Is the deal or no deal? So I ask you again, what has she achieved so far?
And Donald Tusk said last night, it was very clear the other European leaders understood the problem and they wanted to help. It was a matter of how to do that. And the Prime Minister needs to be allowed to complete that. She was supposed to be seeing the Irish Prime Minister today to continue these negotiations.
He said it's the deal.
Andrew, maybe all that she'll manage to achieve is to make people understand there isn't anything else there, right? This is the deal. We either have this deal or we don't have a Brexit or we don't have a deal.
She should have gone ahead with the vote in Parliament.
In my opinion, it was sensible not to do it because a lot of people would have foolishly voted against the only deal on the table. So she did the only politically wise thing. But the idea that there's something else
undemocratic.
If that hasn't changed, what was the point of postponing the vote? If this is simply clocking up air miles,
she might hope to get assurances that might alter some people's minds, as they ought. And time might do that. There was certainly no point in pressing on with the vote. That was certainly pointless. So, but ultimately, if it just brings home the idea, there's nothing else there. It's this deal, or it's no deal at all, or it's no Brexit.
I do think that this panel actually in some ways typifies the problem, because here we are, Andrew, you and I, with three Conservative politicians from different parts of the party fighting over whether Theresa May has got a deal, could get a better deal, which parts of the party will support her, which won't, and we're on the brink of a leadership contest. And I just wonder how viewers at home, how voters will be sitting, not you three personally, but looking at the Conservative Party right now and thinking and wondering whether you've got any idea whether how they actually feel about this. I mean, here, in the public's view, the country is on teetering on a precipice over the biggest decision it's going to make in post-war history. And here's the Conservative Party.
Well, I think Labour as well.
I mean, if Labour made its view, but if Labour made its view clear, we wouldn't be in this position.
You're the government. Your party is the government, and you're the ones that are supposed to be running these negotiations. And you can't agree. And you've got to the point where your Prime Minister is potentially about to be ousted as party leader. I mean, this massive bout of introspection is more than just a self-indulgence that Conservative Party cabinet ministers have been saying all over the media this morning. It's worse than that. I mean, it looks like a dereliction of responsibility.
The deal would have been passed.
You can hardly, as a Tory peer, blame Labour for the shambles that the government is now in. You can hardly blame the opposition for that.
In my opinion, if the Labour Party supported the deal in the House of Commons, the deal would have passed. So they have to take... Let's not be ridiculous. Obviously, the referendum was a Conservative idea. It's mainly backed by Conservatives. The Conservative Party is very split. So I don't want to have a ridiculous position where I'm sort of saying the Conservative Party is not... But if Labour had voted for the deal, or indeed if it came out now and told us what its position was on the second referendum, or pushed for a vote of confidence...
I mean, 2 years ago they had a position which they...
Because they're members of Parliament responsible for this country's future, as well as the government.
And let me just... It's very clear that the Labour Party have been playing politics with this. It's understandable. You can say that's entirely their right as the opposition. But the same, I think the very sensible point that you make, that the public will look at this and say, why are you talking about internal politics when the Prime Minister is out there in a crucial part of an international negotiation? I think they will look at Parliament as a whole and say, why is the Labour Party playing politics rather than putting forward a concrete proposal?
That may well be true, but the government is in charge.
Of course that's true, and I don't want to be saying that the government is not primarily responsible, or the split in the Conservative Party is a disaster, and in my view the position we've ended up in is a disgrace. However, it is also true that the position in this country would be clearer if the Labour Party would decide whether it wants a no confidence, whether it wants a second referendum, or whether it's going to support the deal. And until it makes that decision, it's very difficult for Parliament to reach a consensus.
Well, we're going to be speaking to Labour later. But let me just show you this tweet from Sammy Wilson, the influential DUP MP. He says, our confidence in supply agreement, that's the arrangement the DUP has that keeps the Mrs May in power. He says it's with the Conservative and Unionist Party. He then says the current Brexit policy is totally unacceptable to the DUP, and he also thinks it can't get through the Commons. It's a matter for Conservative MPs, he says, to decide who the leader is, but the policy must change. Liam Fox, the policy is not changing, is it?
Well, the whole point of the Prime Minister's visit is to see how we can give reassurance to people like the DUP. Now, it seems to me we're in a position where the only thing that can actually command a majority in the House of Commons is the current deal if the worries about the backstop are removed. The other alternatives...
But the worries about the backstop won't be removed. The Europeans have made it clear that the backstop is, as they may clarify it a bit, they may give you an interpretation of what it means. The substance isn't going to change.
Well, we'll see, but we haven't got to the end of this process. I think the whole ridiculous thing, and the reason why I think the public will think this is absurd and self-indulgent and selfish, is that the Prime Minister is involved in a major national negotiation, having given Parliament a promise that she would do so, and she's no sooner off on those discussions with European leaders when she has to come back to fight a confidence vote that clearly has been timed for a number of different reasons.
Nadine Dorries, have you and your allies, have you triggered a leadership challenge that you now look like losing?
Not at all, no. I put my letter in 2 months ago because the writing was on the wall. You know, one of the issues I have with our Prime Minister is that, you know, when she called the 17th general election and the manifesto hit the streets, which not a single cabinet minister or a minister had seen or approved, I called that a bit of a problem. We lost 33 of our colleagues. Some of us haven't quite forgiven her for that. But then we had checkers that not a single cabinet minister or a minister had seen or approved. And then now we have this withdrawal agreement that blindsided the cabinet that not a single person had seen or approved. We have a Prime Minister who doesn't listen and who can't negotiate. And we need somebody who listens not only to MPs, but the DUP, to the country and to the other 27 EU leaders. We need somebody who's more able to negotiate and to get a better deal.
Changing leader doesn't change the basic problem.
What happens if you listen to the DUP and the country and they say different...
Daniel, we're not in power.
What happens if you listen to the DUP and the country and they say different things, for instance? So in the end, a Prime Minister has to provide a judgment, and the judgment the Prime Minister has made seems to me to be right, which is this is the only deal
Danny, the Moldovans have got a unilateral exit clause on their trade agreement. We couldn't even negotiate one. We need the Moldovan negotiators over here because they'll do a better job than our team.
All right, the basic problem is on the arithmetic. Changing the leader does not change the basic arithmetic of Parliament.
It's a Remainer Parliament with a minority. Hold your horses. We're going to Heidi Allen now, one of your Conservative colleagues in the happy Conservative family. We're seeing live on BBC television this morning. She's in the central lobby. There she is. She's smiling at least. Heidi Allen, who are you voting for? Are you voting for the Prime Minister tonight?
I will, but I was just listening to the noise. All I can hear coming down here is the racket coming out of your studio. Yes, I will, and I think the significant number of my colleagues, certainly more than plenty, will be voting for the Prime Minister tonight. And lots of us will have some questions for her, but there's no doubt in my mind that she'll be supported.
And would you vote for her deal if it was finally put before the Commons?
Assuming it's in a similar condition as we've seen it recently, then no, I won't. And I'm not entirely certain what her trips around Europe, if that's been able to successfully achieve anything more. For me, to be honest, it was more about more than just the backstop, to be fair. So I think it's unlikely.
So let me get this clear. you're going to vote for the Prime Minister, but you're going to vote against her deal.
Yes,
what's the point of that?
Well, there's multiple factors at play here. You know, first and foremost, we should all of us be thinking about the country rather than our own internal petty squabbles. And changing Prime Minister and changing the person who's been building the relationships with Europe at this time is frankly irresponsible and absolutely the wrong thing to do. I don't think the money markets nor the potential money in people's pockets would thank us for doing that. So the Prime Minister is right to stay for that. I think she's also you know, most likely, having taken this deal as far as she had, being the right person to be able to now listen to colleagues, listen to what's concerning, listen to Parliament, listen to the country, and you know, possibly condition it. And I know Nadine, certainly in your studio, and possibly Liam won't like me for saying this, but it needs to be conditioned on what the people of this country think.
Well, you want a second referendum?
I don't want one, Angela. That's absolutely the last thing I do. But I fear, you know, not only are the squabbles happening in Parliament, within the government, they're also happening within the Tory party now. We need some people with some common sense. That's the great British public to tell us whether the Prime Minister's deal, we need to have that vote on it first and foremost. I'd urge the Prime Minister to bring that next week. And now she's finished broadly her trips around Europe. Let's get that vote out of the way, yes or no, and then let's put the deal to the British public.
If she doesn't win tonight and there's a Tory leadership contest, are there some potential future Conservative leaders that you would find it difficult or impossible to stay in the Conservative Party?
Now there's the thing, Andrew. I didn't think for 1 minute you would ask me who I was going to back or who I'd like to see there. Yes, I think you know the answer to that, although you know, I prefaced it
tell our viewers what the answer is.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Firstly, I really don't think she's going to lose tonight. I think she's going to have tremendous
but if she
support.
does, indulge me.
So certainly, any of the characters who've been in the media a lot, whether it's Boris or Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, no, I absolutely couldn't back them.
So you would give up the Tory whip? If it was either Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson?
Yeah, I think I would have to, and I know I wouldn't be alone in that. There would be a significant number of colleagues who agree with me entirely. You know, neither of those characters for me are the right person to pick this mess up, should it come to pass, and lead our country to a stable future.
Let me put your point to Nadine Dorries. What do you say?
Well, I mean, that just won't happen. There'll be always people who say, I mean, Heidi may be treated to her word, but there are always people who say, you know, I won't tolerate this. They will not give up their jobs and their Conservative whip when it comes to it. But Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think I should say this now, is absolutely not standing and will not be putting his name forward.
But Boris is almost certainly will be standing.
I'm sure Boris and as the polls showed last week, Boris has massive support out the country, and therefore I think
the party in the country, the Tory party in the country, the polls don't necessarily show that he is massive support among voters in the country.
What I would like to see is the people
I
would like to see going forward are Amber Rudd, who's on completely actually the opposite end of the spectrum, and Boris, because I'd like to see the Tory party membership who will be making this decision, and for the first time in a while, providing with a leader who has a mandate in our party, because of course Theresa May doesn't have a mandate. She became leader almost by default. I'd like the Tory membership to be involved and to give a new leader a mandate to lead.
All right.
The problem is, though, that it doesn't change Parliament. And the point I was making, Parliament has a natural Remainer majority, irrespective of what the public voted at the referendum. It's got a minority Conservative government. Changing the leader is not going to improve that. If anything, all it's going to do is increase the fragmentation inside the parliamentary party. It will be more difficult for any other leader to rule and govern the party in Parliament than it is for Theresa May today. It doesn't actually change the basic position, which is the numbers in Parliament. LBJ's first rule was learn to count. Unless you understand the arithmetic in Parliament, you can't make sense of where we are.
And even if a Brexiteer, a new Brexiteer Tory leader, Boris Johnson or somebody else, managed to gain back the support of the DUP, there are people like Heidi and others who I've spoken to privately on the remaining wing of the Tory party who would resign the whip in protest at that. Plus, as Liam indicates, it would solidify support in the opposition parties against whoever was leading the Tory party and their form of Brexit.
But it might happen in reverse. There might be MPs who might resign the whip if Theresa May wins the vote tonight, who don't think they can continue any longer with Theresa May. Who knows? There are some people who feel very strongly about it.
So whatever the outcome, your party is in deep trouble. whatever the outcome.
Well,
you're making an empty threat on behalf of other people, though.
No, I'm not, absolutely not. I say that as strongly as Heidi feels that she wouldn't like to serve with one leader, there are people who are the reason why this leadership competition is happening, because there are people who feel very strongly about being...
It's actually not a leadership competition, it's a vote of confidence in the leader. And once the vote of confidence, once the leader receives a vote of confidence, then the leader deserves to have the confidence of a party. People who are saying democratic elections have consequences. This has a consequence. You can't call this vote of confidence and then not respect the result. If the leader does, they will have the mandate you say she lacks.
Danny, this leader is unable to change the policy. She's unable to get a better deal. If we continue with this leader, we use the DUP, we will be into a general election. We will be in government but not in power. If we continue with Theresa May and continue with this policy...
Everybody makes empty threats, but you think the DUP is the DUP threat. In other words, the threats that you would like to be serious, you regard those as serious.
I think they're quite, as Andrea was just told, I think they're quite serious, that they cannot, they fear the backstop less than they fear Jeremy Corbyn, or is it more than they fear? They would rather that we went to an election and risk Jeremy Corbyn than the backstop.
I'm putting my hands
all right, Heidi, let's come back to you for a final word. Heidi Allen there in the Commons and Central Lobby, yes.
I like wild and crazy ideas. Never mind the DUP, never mind the hard Brexiteers. What about the Prime Minister, Theresa May, reaches out, because this is beyond party politics now, reaches out across the Commons and finds a deal that everybody can support and collectively involves the general public in that. This shouldn't just be about the Tory party. This is a national debate. It's far more important than our own petty in-house squabbling. This needs to involve the whole of Parliament, every parliamentary party and also the British people.
And what chances would you give of Mrs May doing a deal with the Labour front bench?
I don't necessarily think it's the Labour front bench. I didn't say the front bench, but the party. The Labour Party are as splintered as we are over this. So this is time, who has it said, cool minds, calm heads, whatever it is. This is time for grown-up politics. And I tell you what, the British people actually don't care which political party sort this out. They just want us to sort this mess out. Dare I say, the Tory party have put us in this mess. It needs the British public and the whole of Parliament to get us out of it.
All right.
When did that last happen?
Heidi Allen, we will leave it there. Thank you for joining us from Central Lobby. Nadine Dorries, we're going to let you go because you want to get into the chamber for Prime Minister's questions. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be joined now by the former Tory party chairman, Grant Shapps, as he gets settled in. Let me just go back to Liam Fox. Liam Fox, many people on your wing of the party are puzzled by your position and your support for the May deal. Your natural soulmates like David Davis, Dominic Raab, other strong Brexiteers like yourself, they're all against this deal. Why are you so in favour of it?
Because I think there are only three things that can now happen in our politics because of the points I was making earlier about our parliamentary arithmetic, first of all, and the makeup of Parliament. And that is that I think the only deal that could go through would be if the Prime Minister was able to allay the fears on the backstop, which she may or may not be able to do, but I think that's the only deal that can go through. The other alternatives are that we end up in a Parliament that's got a Remainer majority that wants to keep us in the EU in one way or another, or we leave without any agreement with the European Union. Neither of those, the first of those is, I think, democratically completely unacceptable because the public gave us an instruction in the referendum. Now, I've heard my colleagues say, but Parliament is sovereign. I actually don't buy that. I think that in terms of the referendum, we contracted out our sovereignty to the people and said, we're not going to make a decision on this as Parliament, you make a decision for us and give us an instruction. So I can't accept that one. And in terms of no deal, I think there are real problems with a real no deal that doesn't give us any buffering. For example, our exporters, let's take our farmers, our agricultural exporters, would face common external tariffs in Europe without any chance for us to mitigate that. And that would be a real impact on parts of our economy. So when people say no deal is fine, it's easy, it won't have any consequences, it will have consequences. Now, they may be manageable, they may even be bearable, mostly to those who wouldn't have to pay the price. But it would still be a problem for us to face. And I think that we've just got to be realistic about what is possible in the Parliament that we have.
What happened to the Liam Fox that told the Today programme in 2017 that a trade deal with the EU would be, quote, one of the easiest in human history?
I think the trade deal, the one that we haven't done yet, will be relatively straightforward compared to the withdrawal agreement, which was always, because it's about politics, citizens' rights and money, was always going to be the much more difficult part. When we get to the trade agreement with the European Union, because we begin from full regulatory and legislative alignment, that should be a much easier element than the withdrawal agreement is proving to be. The problem here is, and I have to raise this quite a lot with colleagues, is that you can't get to any model of a European trade agreement, be it the Prime Minister's proposed one, or Canada Plus, or Norway Plus, or anything else, until you've got the withdrawal agreement. It is a prerequisite in terms of Article 50 that we reach that withdrawal agreement with the EU.
Grant Shapps has joined us, former chairman of the Conservative Party. How are you going to vote?
I'm going to go along and hear what she says, well, actually, hopefully at Prime Minister's questions, but also at 5 o'clock when she addresses the 1922.
This is when she addresses all the Conservative MPs. I assume most of her ministers will be there as well, and all the backbenchers.
Yeah, the 22 now can have backbenchers and frontbenchers. The rules were changed several years ago, so everyone will go along. Because for me, the absolute key issue is not Theresa May, but the deal itself. And the backstop, which I was about to vote against the withdrawal agreement, had it have not been stopped, the vote would have been last night, is for me the real issue. Because I think no MP should ever vote to hand power away from Parliament that it cannot be certain of ever getting back again. So we can sort out the backstop, and I heard her say on the steps of Downing Street this morning she'd made significant, I think was the word she used, progress on it, and I've had calls with number 10 this morning telling me that she's going to elaborate on that today.
Do you have any idea what that means?
No, I heard...
Do you have any idea why she's saying that?
No, none whatsoever. Which is
Do you have any idea of what's come out of Berlin, Brussels or Paris that would lead you to conclude that?
Nope. All I can base it on is
so it's a
what she said on
prayer.
number 10, and B, what number 10 have called me this morning.
What does she have to say?
For me, and by the way, I was a Remainer in the...
I understand, but what does she have to say on the backstop?
The issue is, I cannot vote for something where Parliament can indefinitely lose the power to withdraw from it in the same way as we do when we sign up to an international treaty. So what she needs to say is, we have found a way of somehow time limiting or providing a unilateral exit to this specific part of the agreement that she and everybody else says we never need to enter anyway. So it seems to me it ought not be beyond the wit of the whole EU to do that. And although the signs didn't look very positive out yesterday, this morning number 10 were on the phone to me, 2 separate phone calls assuring me that she's got something interesting
But what's
to say.
the logic of having a confidence vote while the Prime Minister is in that process?
Sure. So, I mean, Liam, you'll remember, like over a year ago, after we'd lost that majority in the general election, the snap general election, I was the one who went out and said, if we're going to change leader, to go and negotiate a different deal, now that Theresa's lost our majority, that was the time to do it. And the curious thing is, the people who are saying absolutely not now are exactly the people now who are putting in the confidence level.
We are where we are, whether you wanted one or not, whether you didn't or not, whether the media stoked it up or not, we are where we are. Why, Liam Fox, tell Grant Shapps why he should vote for Mrs May tonight?
Because I think that to push the country into a Conservative leadership, leadership for the premiership of the country, at the present time, in the middle of the negotiations, makes no sense. The process itself, as Grant knows, has been a former chairman of the party, can take some time. I think that our party activists, having not been given a voice last time, will want to have full regional hustings. It will take us well into the spring. If we do it quickly, we might get a leader in place by the end of February. That seems to me to be an absurd period.
I think the arguments need to... I mean, there's very good reasons for not changing a lead now, but I think the arguments have to be stronger than the process is a bit tricky. For one thing, when I was party chairman, it was separate constituency associations collected the membership. It took several weeks to gather that information centrally. That has now actually been turned into a central database, the only way to join the party, essentially. I don't agree it has to take forever. And actually, by the way, I think if the argument's made, you can't do this because you can't do it in time, then she'll lose. If the argument is actually she has achieved something out of her talks in Europe yesterday that we just don't know about yet, and or she's found another way to resolve this problem, then sensible middle ground people who are Remainers like me will go, you know what, I don't want to see this country in crisis.
So
we'll vote to support.
So the argument that it's a bad time to change leader, that didn't wash with Grant Shapps. Have another go.
No, I think it's the public will look at us and
but he's
say,
turned that one down.
He will say, here's a Prime Minister in the middle. She actually has to interrupt a tour that she's doing to try to achieve what both Grant and I want to see, because Tory MPs want to choose this moment, bizarrely of all moments, to have a confidence vote. I think they will look at us and say, are you acting in your party's interest? Are you acting in the national interest?
But you don't buy that.
Again, I can see absolutely the emails coming in from constituents saying, whatever you do, don't upset the apple cart. And again, that's a very good argument. But the basic principled argument has to be what is right and wrong for Parliament to do. Now, if she can find a way of letting us off the hook, of voting away powers that we can never again return in the unlikely event of the backstop, then she's home and dry.
What's your alternative? What's the alternative route? Let's say that she doesn't get this deal. So what are you proposing?
From my point of view, Danny, what I would say is I voted Remain because I saw that this would be an enormous problem to leave. But I would rather we remain and have then for the best possible deal with Europe, or leave and leave properly with probably free trade agreements, but not have this kind of not in nor out muddle that we're in at the moment.
Which of those two do you prefer? I mean, are you?
Well,
so let's
the one I originally voted for, obviously, but we've now passed a law that says we leave. And your arguments that you were having in here before
you want a second referendum,
let me just explain this. Your arguments before, no, I don't want a second, absolutely not second referendum. That I would rule that one out.
So you would remain without a second referendum?
Without a second referendum. And let me just point this out.
So you just think Parliament should just...
Danny, let me just finish to one point. Your arguments that I've heard in here before I came on about no arithmetic would change in Parliament if it was a different leader, I entirely agree with that. But of course that argument actually works in both directions. The one piece of fact that we know is that the law has already been passed to leave at 11 p.m. on the 29th of March. So nothing happening actually means we end up leaving, whether or not there's an agreement in place. So starting from the position we're in at the moment, rather than
we've got 8 minutes to Prime Minister's questions. I think Liam Fox still has a bit of work to do on Grant Shapps to get his vote, but we shall see. Several hours ago, Pippa, we're losing you too. Before you go, final thought from you?
I think probably at this point, if I'm going to put it on the line, I think she might just win it. Whether it's enough to guarantee her future, and indeed, of course, after that, we still have all the spectre of her not being able to get her deal tweaked or otherwise. I don't think it'll be enough to get through Parliament, and then potentially next week a no confidence vote amongst MPs across Parliament in the government.
All right. Well, we shall see. Pippa, thank you for that. Grant Shapps, thanks for joining us too. Prime Minister's questions, I say, just some minutes away. We're going to be joined by the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. She's just about to get wired up for sound to join us, and also by the Shadow Justice Secretary, Labour's Richard Bergen. He's been waiting on the wings and he will join us too. Well, that's happening. Liam Fox, if there is no movement on the backstop, will you still support the deal?
Well, if there's no movement on the backstop, it's very likely that one of two things happens. And that's either that, as Grant said, he would rather remain in the EU without a referendum, which I think would be a democratic affront. I think that brings a whole range of consequences. Or perhaps more likely, we then have to up our preparations for no deal and leave the European Union without an agreed deal.
Right, but my question was, if there is no change of substance or even clarification of any great meaning to the backstop, do you still support the deal?
I think that it's very difficult to support the deal if we don't get changes to the backstop. I don't think it will get through. I'm not even sure that the Cabinet will agree for it to be put to the House of Commons.
Why is Downing Street calling Grant Shapps, telling him about progress on the backstop, and not calling his Trade Secretary?
Well, of course,
you told me earlier you didn't know.
Well, we were due to have a Cabinet meeting today, which has now been put off because we're in the middle of a confidence vote.
But would other Cabinet Ministers, if there isn't clarification or change on the backstop, would they not vote for it either?
Well, we're not expecting this process to be over. This is a process that the Prime Minister is in. Having listened to what the House of Commons said and listened to what the Conservative Party said, now out there trying to achieve those changes with our European partnership. Should have been talking and going to see the Irish Prime Minister after Cabinet today. We're seeing an interruption of the process. I just think that people out there, our party supporters and people in the country will be saying, why, oh why, would the Tory party plunge itself into a confidence vote on the Prime Minister in the middle of a process which is clearly in the national interest and clearly in the party's interest.
All right. Laura Kuenssberg is with us now. BBC research, I think, say now about 145 Tory MPs, including ministers, have come out for her. She needs 158. That, if you take the number at face value, or either you take their protestations at face value, she's not far off winning.
That's right.
What are you hearing?
Well, first thing to say, it's a secret ballot. Second thing to say, that I've just been on College Green, and Number 10 in the last hour or so have done quite a good job of flushing the place with government loyalists. Ministers out there, ministers like the Secretary of State for Trade here, saying, look, don't do this, don't plunge us into chaos. This is a reckless thing. I think there's a lot of genuine anger at the mainly Brexiteers, not only Brexiteers who've put their letters in. We should also say that this is mainly a Eurosceptic acting against the Prime Minister, but not entirely. So people are extremely cross about the fact that this has got to this. But a government minister has just said to me, look, I think it will be closer than people suspect. So if there's a sense that she's somehow home and dry, I think it's still early in the day to say that. But just briefly, I want to pick up on something that Liam Fox just said. He just suggested that the deal, as it stands, might not get cabinet backing without changes. Now, that's a very serious thing.
I've not heard that before,
tonight,
have you?
I haven't heard a cabinet minister be so candid in public about the fact that they don't believe that it can fly without changes to the backstop. Now, of course, the Prime Minister has been, until today, engaged in trying to get changes to the controversial backstop. But even if she survives tonight, and it seems right now that she will, her deal is not going to survive in its current state. I think that's pretty clear.
Well, to be fair, you know, the Cabinet was consulted about the decision to pull the vote, and the Cabinet took the view that that could not be put to Parliament because it would be unlikely to pass through Parliament. So I think you already have an example of where the collective government has worked
But
there.
you did sign off the deal a couple of weeks before.
But we have, it's been very clear that there are deep reservations about that one particular element. And there's a debate about that element of the backstop, as I was explaining in Parliament.
But why didn't the Cabinet do something about it?
There are strong views in the European Union, in fact growing views in the European Union, that the backstop is not a good place for them to be. I've heard colleagues in France, for example, saying, why should we persuade French voters that if the British end up in the backstop, that we are, the French voters, the French taxpayers, are effectively paying for British membership of the single market. So there are strong arguments, and I think we do have to try to see how our position is perceived from the European Union.
This idea that the backstop is so painful for the rest of the EU, it's like the German car makers were going to come to your rescue because they needed a deal, because they said, we've never heard a word from the German car deal. It's the dog that doesn't bark. If this backstop deal is not acceptable as currently constituted, why did the Cabinet let the deal go forward to the Commons?
The Cabinet didn't allow the ultimate vote to go to the Commons because it's very clear that there have been an increasing number of reservations, that the reservations from the DUP, which you very reasonably mentioned, which is a very dynamic situation. But Parliament will ultimately have to decide that what the Prime Minister is able to negotiate with our European partners, do they find that acceptable? If they don't, then they have to come to alternative positions. We have to know what the alternatives are going to be.
We just can get this clear. The Cabinet did approve the deal. The Cabinet approved the deal and allowed the Prime Minister to put it forward for debate and then vote in the Commons.
And then we decided not to put it to
because you thought you were going to lose.
Because it's become... Because it's a parliamentary democracy we live in.
Why did you approve the deal in the first place if you're now saying if it's not changed you wouldn't vote for it?
The Cabinet collectively agreed that deal. The Cabinet collectively decided that it could not be put to the House of Commons because it wouldn't get through the House of Commons. But when my colleagues, if they ultimately don't accept that, they'll have to accept that one of two other things happen.
All right.
Either we stay in the EU, which is undemocratic, or we leave with no deal.
Richard Bergen's been very patient here. Would you not have been better today just to stay at home, put your feet up, have a cup of tea and watch the Tories rip themselves apart?
I thought I'd come and watch it with you instead, Andrew.
You get a ringside seat. You get a ringside seat. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think it's quite incredible. I've never seen any political party have 3 or 4 MPs on a television programme at the same time putting forward